Welcome to Wakey, Echoes of the Esoteric. Esenia here with co-host Jenica Haywood and joined today by guest Asia Raine. Asia specializes in esoteric psychology and what was the other thing?
Hypnotherapy. Oh, complex trauma.
Hypnotherapy. Complex trauma.
Hypnotherapy.
I had this list in my head and I know you so well and then I just blanked, right? Wild. So, complex trauma and hypnotherapy, as well as esoteric psychology. This is quite a mix. We are so super happy, excited to have you here with us today for this conversation. We're going to dive right in. Today, we are discussing shadow work. Ooh, the shadow. So much that we can say here. First things first, let's introduce this work appropriately as a level 1 modality and understand how important it is that people are introduced to this level of work. It is one of the outermost teachings of the exoteric, and where we come into contact with this new perspective on the inner world and what we might otherwise see as dark or painful, right? So I would love to pick your brain, Asia, immediately as we open here with your perspective on, because you do know the work of the fourth way, this esoteric objective path to enlightenment, right? What is your take on the place for shadow work in a person's journey who would be drawn into the level of the mesoteric, eventually into second level teachings?
I honestly see shadow work and inner child work. I see those as kind of interchangeable terms as a real important baseline. I feel like it is stepping into a very real landscape that if it's unfamiliar to you, then moving further into the mesoteric, you could find yourself like asleep to certain things or confused about a number of things. Having that dialogue and understanding the inner parts of yourself, and I like to use it as, I like to call it inner child work, mainly because there can be a little bit of a slant if you use the word shadow work, where somebody thinks that it's something that is there that is derailing you, could be viewed as negative, and we've got to get rid of it, versus looking at it as something that is present and creating a space where it can either be dialogued with or observed, or it can voluntarily show itself in a way, it meaning whatever it is, the complex trauma or the things that have been repressed or pushed aside. Understanding that there is something there is really important. Understanding that you might want to be rejecting something that's already been rejected doesn't necessarily solve anything. It just keeps you really closer to the, like in the exoteric, like it's going to keep you looping. It's going to keep you in a place where even if you do take 3 or 4 steps forward with, say, your physical center, or even your emotional center, you could get thrown off by your mental center if you have not really been even like know that there's something else there to work at. So it is, to me, it is one of the most important places to start. And then as you go from there, then you're going to learn as you go further along how the esoteric actually and the mesoteric actually work with this. I find that there's integration that works out really well, but it is the beginning. It's not the end point. We don't just, in this work, we don't just start there and then feel that we've arrived. So I feel like, yeah, this is a really great place to begin, because it is such an effective way to know parts of yourself, know who you are, and then use it as a place of self-observation in a way that is really in depth.
I love that you brought up that aspect of just the shadow work, complex trauma, inner child work. It's like they point all the same direction. It's just
That's a
that
good way
people
to
don't
put it.
understand that. And
Mm-hmm.
this is exactly why in second level work, we're not talking about those things anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because we come through the exoteric and learn those outermost modalities that bring us in touch with the inner world in a completely different way, where we start to contend with things that we didn't know even existed in us. We're starting that process of self-observation in a sense, and then realize that all of those conversations we were having, it could be, oh man, the inner child work, the complex trauma, twin flames, karma. You could just pile so many things onto the list, right? Where at the level of this work, we come in and we start a new conversation and then go, oh, it was all me. Oh, oh, it was all me. It was all inner world, inner working, dysfunction, misunderstanding of how things actually work. Like just I was looking for the word conglomeration. Sounded a bit like I had a speech impediment, but uh that idea, just that simple idea that you brought forward, and that those terms can be interchangeable in a sense, I think is something very unfamiliar for people.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to exclaim my appreciation for that, because through this lens of the mesoteric, the deep inner work that we're introduced to, that has a completely different flavor, a completely different objective, a whole new language, a whole new landscape, leaves behind in honor those outermost teachings that we come into contact with, that really are so necessary, that we can't arrive at the mesoteric without having to some extent explored.
I think that's the key. I think that is the thing that answers your first question. Your desire, or a person's desire, to do the second level teaching and to get there. If you have no interest or have not even engaged in these outermost teachings, it's like you're not even on the bridge. You haven't even gotten on the boat to cross the moat to get there. Like, there needs to be some familiarity with even how you personally are oriented to even talking about it, thinking about it, orienting yourself to that. Is it important? Is it just flippant? Is it, you really do have to have something there, some awareness of that. And I want to even say it's a little more in depth than just journaling. So even your orientation to how are you relating to yourself in those outermost concepts? Like, what does that look like to you, right? And so I think, with what you just said, it's like, you need this. That is, in my opinion, so essential before embarking on the call. Like, there is going to be parts of you that are already, really starting to come into alignment, that actually recognizes that there is something more, and are drawn to this mesoteric, is and think that it's esoteric, right? Still kind of like, but what's more? And you find that you're still anchored to these outermost parts of everything, and you are really confused as to why. And so then it's possible that you could understand or hear the word shadow work, and then you think you've got to get rid of something. You got to, like, just, what is this? I got to cut it all off. I've got to just like,
Yeah.
release it. I've got to, whatever the thing is, like, there's so many things that you could think that you're doing, when in all reality, it's like just even, trimming the bush instead of pulling it up from the root, really, really going to what the root is. And just thinking, well, if I just cut this away, then that overgrowth isn't, I mean, it's there, it's no big deal now. It's like under control, no problem. And the truth is if you're lucky enough to know that you need to trim something, just even notice that there is something there to trim away, then there it is. But you really ought to be looking at what the root cause is. And there's another dive. So there's a whole practice, there's a whole exercise that I feel is
Yeah.
so important to engage in. And I don't think they're exclusive either. I just think there's a lot that needs to be done depending on how extensive you this practice, these outermost teachings really are necessary for where you are in your development and your readiness for some of the things that as you get into the work can kind of be very disorienting or a little bit like, now you get to drop that belief system away, like it, yeah. I it's really, really important to have that there. So yeah.
I have such an appreciation for you and what you do. And, it's been one of these things that's kind of cycled through my mind a couple of times. And I would love for Jen to chime in on this too, just in accolade of Asia, because this concept just kind of came through and I was like, wow, that is really beautiful. You and I have had many a conversation, Asia, around the work that you do and how it relates to second level work. And there's this, I don't know, this approach where oftentimes in teaching or in coaching, a person will offer what they offer and have that, okay, well, if you're not ready for it yet, then you're not ready for it. But what then, right? So if people are being vetted or by law are vetting themselves and simply can't hear the teaching, and they have access to an exoteric teacher, to someone who is working in the outermost circle with the modalities and the outermost teachings, and also has an understanding of the esoteric through their own inner work, through that second level teaching that they've immersed in, which is you, right? So the bridge that you're building, like the gap that you're filling, and the it's like a welcome carpet just being rolled out. Like, if a person who is still exploring level 1 is lucky enough to find you, they are being prepared for the deepest dive they will ever take spiritually in the most graceful, beautiful, supported way. And I just want to like give you
Thank you.
bumps. Like, seriously. I know Jen can expound on that and say it probably even more eloquently than I did, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, I hold such high regard for Asia. She, is someone who actually opened the door for me to enter into the exoteric and learn, not only open the door, but allow me the choice to enter into it or not. And the entering into this kind of preliminary self-observation and the learning of something other than the obvious outside world in our experience with our five senses and everything that's visible here. It's really the first entrance into something more, something beyond, and something that is intangible and very difficult to understand. And I also very much honor anybody walking through that path right now, because I hold it very dear to me, because there was so many practices of really having the choice to look deeper and to go walk full on into the darkness, walk into what you don't want to see and have actively prevented yourself from seeing. And it's really your first walk into spirituality, into what we are as humans, into these deeper questions, into why it is that we are the way that we are and react and respond and experience the world the way that we do. So as someone who has walked through the esoteric or exoteric and done 16 years of shadow work in this, through this definition, through the exoteric definition, it was just chock full of practices and lessons and ways to navigate my being in a way that would have never even occurred to me prior, didn't occur to me prior, and doesn't occur to many people that have nothing more than that don't have a spirituality that's been built from within, as opposed to something that's coming from the outside in. And it really preps you for the potential to enter into the next phase, into the mesoteric, largely because there has to be a strength built in confronting what, you know, is largely understood in the current spirituality world as like your inner demons, or you know, we talk about the inner child and the hurt and the struggle and the suffering with the inner child, but then who has that been done by? And the best way to describe that would be like either inner demons, or again, when you get into complex trauma, these experiences are real, current, and um actual. So you have to contend with so many different layers of living life while your inner world and inner life is telling you these other things, while on top of that being so disoriented with so many questions, and you know, a lot of it is just like this trying to survive, trying to just live in life without having triggers, having, you know, your inner world just come apart. So there's so much to do in the exoteric, and you can spend as much time as you want or need. And so much of it is really a practice for what is beyond. Um, and a big part of the trouble is that is, or of that is that we, and I, you know, believed that to be the ultimate, believed that to be what was, you know, that's just what you did. You know, you worked on your triggers, you found out your, you know, your history of abuse, you figured out what inside that was doing and where it was traumatizing. You found your inner child and the levels and layers of experiences that have been frozen in time through those levels and ages. And instead of cutting away, like what you were saying, you bring it forward and you integrate it, and you help it ascend into more of your being, more of who you are. And so there's this really broad understanding of like, this is it. This is what we need to do. We need to do our shadow work. We need to, you know, defeat our inner demons and integrate our inner child, and that'll make me whole. That's what a whole human is. And in actuality, and through this last, you know, last year, there's been enough of moving through all of this to end up finding the door to the mesoteric, which has introduced an even broader, like the next level of self-mastery, the next level of what we would call healing, but it's less of healing and more of unifying. And it's just an entirely different world. Yes, healing is a by proxy of that. But it's not the ultimate, it's not the greatest expression of the human. It's not something that will actually bring you into a wholeness and a unity. It brings enough of a unification for you to enter into the mesoteric when it calls to you, or you're called to it, when it presents itself to you.
Yeah.
So really all of that to say, like, I hold a very deep regard for the work, for everything that's learned in the exoteric, for the enormous amount of strength it takes to really look at the experiences and aspects of you that have been long buried, long overrun, and you know, just like this entire bag of parts of you that has just been sealed shut. Opening that is it's a true heroic act. It really is. But this, you know, we're here today for you in this topic to bring forward the knowledge and the truth that is phase one. That is phase one, not the ultimate. And there is an entire deeper level to what it is to become a unified human. And that only comes about if you have been in the exoteric and you have really done some deep, hard, you know, strength requiring self-work. You know, the stuff that you don't get paid for, the stuff that you have to balance with your regular life, the stuff that is really only chosen, only full on chosen, and extremely important, but it is not the ultimate. It does not, it's the first step, and it's a wonderful one.
I like that you said it's a heroic act to open that bag. I was thinking, when you said that, I was thinking Pandora's box, right?
Yes, yes.
You open this up, and then there is so much that is it either comes at you or you discover or is revealed. And there are so many, when we talk about parts, like there's a fracturing, you know, it is a fracturing. And so this heroic act that you are describing here, there's not a time frame too. And I want to bring that up. Like in the edges of the exoteric, like you don't look at this and go, well, I'll give this 8 years, or I'll give this 3 months, and then we'll see what this is, and I should have this cleaned up by then so I can then step into the meso, because I just, and I know I ultimately am going to be like enlightened, and I'm good. Like you've created this hierarchy already, and you've created this ladder that you're supposed to climb, and you're honestly, without really doing that work and being engaged in that work, not being paid for it, choosing in and letting it show you what needs to be done so that you can even step on to the next rung. Because without that, like it's like standing on, I don't know, I was just like standing on jello. It's like you're not, you can't even operate your being in a unified way, or in a way that is fairly cohesive. And that might sound a little bit weird for me to say that, but honestly, if you want to think about just opening Pandora's box, and I know that there are a lot of people that have made statements before, so if this if you have said this before to yourself, it's like, oh, I just don't want to look at that, or that's not important, I'll just like I'll love and light that away, or something like that. That's the door you need to look at. This is the box that needs to be opened. And there's even a thought process that is fairly popular, that in the current psychological world, that you don't want to re-traumatize yourself, or you don't want to re-traumatize the issue. All of this about the re-traumatizing, and how let's not do that. Let's keep that to the side, and we'll learn to use coping mechanisms, and we're going to use tools and skills, because it's, now that you have these dysfunctions, that's education, and now you know what to do, and if you need medication. And again, I'm not downplaying any of that, but there is more to just what the system has laid in front of us as solutions. And again, you've got to choose something beyond and choose something deeper. And yeah, everybody's journey is going to be really individual, but overall it's an act of courage, and it does require your engagement. And and then truly, it's not the ultimate. It really is the most important, necessary first step to step further.
I love that you brought that up, that idea of well, Jen, and you reverberating at the heroic act, right? Because it has me thinking about that word surrender. Like when we're about to engage in a heroic act, we're claiming it. We're like, oh my, yes, this is exactly what I have to do. It's almost second nature, right? You find the doorway to the exoteric and learn that you can work on yourself and become a more not even unified, but a more aligned human. You can start that spiritual journey and look at yourself in new ways, and learn about energy, and learn about your own trauma and how to heal it, and learn, like, just running the gamut, right? That heroic act, you don't get to surrender without that. You don't charge and then just decide later, okay, well, this isn't working, we'll find something else. You charge and give it all you have. You charge and march out into the front line, and you're doing the work. You're on the way. You're this modality, that modality, learning, you are devouring it in a sense. And you don't get to surrender without having tried everything. You don't get to surrender without giving it everything you got. You don't find people surrendering without first putting everything they have into it. That's not surrender without that level of effort and that heroic act. And surrender is what brings you right into the mesoteric. You don't enter the mesoteric without surrender, without being able to throw your hands in the air and say, well, shit, I've tried everything else. I've been at this for a really long time. I've been out here in the trenches, right? You don't just happen upon someone on the battlefield and shake hands with them. They haven't even been to battle yet and they're going to surrender. That's not surrender. That's not what that is. Surrender is, okay, I've tried everything and now I'm going to do it your way. That's surrender. So you don't get to level 2 without the heroic act of level 1. You don't get to surrender without a charge, without full steam ahead, right? I love that you said that. And there was something else. Oh, Jen mentioned self-work. And it just brought me into this, just that word, that phrase, self-work. And the idea that when we come into second level work, after this charge into all of these modalities and all of this experiencing ourselves through a new lens, right? The self, it's just funny, the pivot that self makes from level 1 to level 2. And this is really why I wanted to talk about shadow work today, because what you believe is your shadow really isn't your shadow. Your shadow is truly the mechanical part of you, but there's no frame of reference for you to even understand what that means without first looking at things that you don't like in yourself, or that have been traumatized and suppressed in yourself. Any number of different ways that we could put words to that, to what shadow work really is. And the way that what we saw as self in level 1, it basically gets burned to the ground in level 2, because all of that work that we did, we've done so much, right? We've learned about ourselves in so many different ways, and energetically, emotionally, psychologically have been put through and have put ourselves through different processes to come to know the inner world differently. And then when that surrender happens, when that phase, when you step into that phase of, damn, I've done all of this work and I'm here, I'm still doing it. Like, what am I gonna go to my grave doing inner child work and shadow work and complex trauma, like all of this stuff? No, no. And that's why we're saying it is not the end all be all of self-evolution. Level 1 will not get you there. Level 1 will get you to level 2. That's where level 1 gets you to. And the self takes on a completely new meaning. The self and what we see as self takes on a completely new language and understanding. And we're looking at things through a new lens, not the shadow lens, but more of like the robot lens. I'll just say it that way. This is, after all, called Wakey Wakey. And you see the graphic and you see the robot looking in the mirror. And this is a whole new level of inner work that is available after we have built that foundation of level 1, where we're coming into communion with the shadow and the inner child and all of the parts and the trauma and the karma and all of the language. We can just put it all in there, right? To see the self in an entirely new way, and to have had that experience of looking at what you believe is yourself for so long, to then be given a microscope and some directions and an objective process that says, okay, I know you've done a lot of work, and I know you've poked that flashlight of yours into a lot of dark spaces, and now I want you to swing it this way. And you're going to take 5 steps, and you're going to look at this, this, and this. And then you're going to take 5 more, and you're going to look at this, this, and this. And next thing you know, you are looking at your inner world in a way that you have never been able to see yourself before, that shows you a level of programming that level 1 could never reveal. And without getting too deep into the process of the inner work and self-observation and what it's all about and what exactly we're looking at, there's programs for that. We'll drop them in the comments. You can join us in Glitch. But it does give this brand new taste and this brand new flavor to what inner work is at a higher level, and where it's taking us and why, and where our place is in this beautiful cosmic creation that we're living in. It's all part of the same system. And it just shines light in new places that allow you to see self completely differently.
Yeah, it's
Completely
like
differently.
it's like you begin in the self-study of the esoteric to peel yourself away from everyone and everything else to get to know you. Excuse me, my gosh. And then you meet the mesoteric and you meet and begin looking at yourself, looking at the self that you don't know. Like I had that formed out in my head a little bit better, but like you begin with the self and looking at your inner world as the self that you know. And then you hit this stage of recognizing you don't know yourself at all. And now you get to look at yourself through the way of like everything that you don't know about the self, about the human, about how it even functions. But prior to that, you have to learn all of these dysfunctioning things that put you spread out throughout the world, responding to expectations and obligations and titles and and identifications and who you're supposed to be and who you're expected to be, and then traumas and responses. And you kind of gather that back so that you can stand as your own and be like, I am worth existing. I don't need to, be just bulldozed by expectations and labels and all of these things. And then you hit mesoteric and it's like, great. Now we're going to look at everything that you couldn't have seen before because it was way too spread out, and recognize how little you actually know about yourself. And again, this is coming from 16 years of self-study and then crossing over this bridge into, holy shit, I know nothing about myself, actually. And there's this gap that's then spread where a deeper level of self-observation comes in, because now you're just looking at everything, how you're functioning in every certain way, how your human works, not just how to mitigate trauma responses, how to mitigate triggers, how to not respond to your dad because you've had this complex relationship and you don't know how to, even relate. Like, it's so much less of your outer world and so much more of recognizing all of the things that you don't know, and the objective laid out system of how to discover it, how to observe it, and start tracking all of the mechanisms of the human. So I hope that helps clarify too, like the difference between the studies and why it's so earth-shattering to go from so much in the exoteric and feel like you're building this amazing foundation of self-knowledge, and then get to this gate where it all kind of crumbles and is washed away and you start again. Like, you do uproot the entire bush and now you're going to be planting an entirely different seed. It's quite jarring, and it's entirely different. But again, the qualities that you do gain through the exoteric, the strength building, the ability to push forward when things get absurdly difficult, like soul crushing difficult, those things are still applied. But it's not just a pivot, it's a removal of one lens to put on a whole different lens, like you said, a microscope as opposed to your regular glasses. There's a whole other world. It's an entirely different experience that is almost rather impossible to make any sense of without direction, guidance, a teacher that is in touch with the esoteric, which is that third level of pure truth, symbolic truth that filters down through.
I love the way I was just getting this visual of the graphic from the Akasha Kitchen this week. That is the man sitting in the boat. And it's that analogy of bailing the water, which is what we're doing in level 1. We're learning shadow work, trauma work, inner child work, karma, releasing energy, cutting ties. Like I could say so many things. We're bailing water out of the boat. We're learning how to think about energy. We're learning how to think about healing in a new way. I certainly, and I know I've never talked to anyone who's been through exoteric teachings who wasn't like, I remember the first time I heard about Reiki and I was like, you're going to look at my picture and do what? Like there's a whole hurdle, right? That you jump through when you begin to learn about the spiritual side of things and come into the exoteric. And as such, it's the pail. It's the pail that's scooping the water and just throwing it out of the boat. And the difference between that and level 2 is that in level 2, we're learning to patch the holes. We are not just dealing with our external circumstances and the trauma that we have, brought into our lives through our experience with that external circumstance. We are reformulating the inner world such that we do not receive the external any longer in a way that provides us with trauma. We're patching the holes and strengthening the boat so that it can stay afloat, and we don't need our pail anymore. There's no longer water to bail out. We're not just losing energy all the time in our dysfunctional state. We are learning to unify and eliminate the dysfunction.
I'm really glad you described it that way, because it can sound pretty threatening, especially when you create such a relationship with modalities that have been so helpful. Like when you really do engage in the exoteric discovery of yourself. And I think I want to make a delineation too. It's like it's the outer edges, but even beyond the outer edges is regular human life that just, it's okay. Their life is going on and they're doing their thing. But the outer edges that we're talking about here are the outer edges of real self-discovery, real self like evolution. So these outer edges that you're talking about, you will find, and I really encourage people to look at what does work for them. And you will find that you could get attached to that. There's going to be some favorite pails. You just going to like love this idea. And so then there can be some resistance to the idea of patching the boat, because your statement of now we don't need the pails could almost feel like, well, wait, what do we, I want my pail. I mean, I want it patched. I mean, that's great. What if it happens again? And, some things like that. And that's even part of the whole process of then recognizing what was helpful to you. And then even knowing that you've got some attachments to it and you've identified with it. And that's part of the next level. This is part of it. That's coming. Right. And that's not important to look at until it's important to look at. So this is again why the increments are there. Yeah. So use the pail, get the water out. But once you get to a point where you're really looking for why am I still collecting water? And I've got 7 buckets here that I can utilize at some point. Maybe there doesn't need to be water. I mean, and that's the question that gets to be asked. Just, that can kind of open that doorway, take you into the next level of, there's actually holes here. And it can dawn on you like, oh, wait a second, I got to bail some more, right? So now you're kind of doing a bit of a juggle, because you're discovering holes, you're still having to bail. Now you're learning how to patch, you're still having to bail, more water's coming in, less water's coming in. Like it's a dance. It's not oh, great, cool. We'll just walk through that door and all's done and taken care of. There's a practice that asks you to engage, just as Jenica was saying. It's a completely different way to look at self. So I love the way she was talking about learning self, learning to look at yourself, knowing and recognizing that who you think you are is actually fragmented and influenced and is responsive or reactive. And so there are fragments there. So bringing that together and working there helps that process. But then in this next level, the looking within versus looking without, there's a very specific and distinct delineation there, and it's going to be a little difficult to describe that to someone that is just starting on this very early echelon of, I think I've got some issues and I've heard of Reiki, right? So there's purpose of all of it. But yeah, it can be kind of scary to think that the things that you have really, I had a problem with that. I have to say this, like, wait a second, no, this works. This is really this works a lot, and recognizing my own attachment to what works, I can share, and I love passing on and really helping people. But my own personal work, I don't use the same modalities that I used to, because I'm now in a different space, and it's a different work altogether.
And I'd really like to highlight too, just riffing off of what you've both said, when you do get to the point of ditching the pail, like that's so symbolic of the surrender, of what kept you safe, of the fears of what if, of this has been my tried and true, this has taken me through my darkest times and has brought me to a place of wholeness I've never known before, or at least self-security and value I've never known. I'll take the word wholeness back, and rather a place of feeling like I can exist and be who I am regardless of outside. That ditching of the pail, that throwing out some of the tools that no longer are needed, is a big, it's a big symbolic aspect of the surrender that comes in, and why it's so earth-shattering, why it's another heroic act, in the sense of like just an amount of trust, the amount of trust required for that kind of a surrender after so much has been through, and after you have attached yourself to X amount of modalities and have found processes that really help to neutralize the triggers and the things that you deal with on a daily basis. Like, that really speaks to this next phase of a lot of what got you to this phase is no longer needed. And it's shocking.
I see a lot of people shy away from it in the spiritual community, which is why we're doing this video today and making shadow work the topic, so that we can have this conversation and shed light on where that beautiful shadow work that you've been doing for so long is taking you, if you allow it.
It has to be chosen, just like it does in the beginning too. It's you get to choose again. And you don't have to.
Well, and it has to be you that chooses it. You who chooses it. It's got to be you initiating yourself into level 2. Someone's going to likely share this video with you, or you're going to hear about level 2 somewhere else out in the world and be like, wait a minute, I heard somebody talking about level 2 spirituality one day and I had no idea. I thought she was nuts, whatever, right? So it's going to be you. Whether or not this video crosses your path or other content from someone else crosses your path, like whatever it is that brings it into your awareness, it's going to be you that makes that choice. It's going to be you that's either ready to really hear it or not. And it is you who is initiating yourself into those teachings. No one else can initiate you. It's you. I mean, it's always been you. It's always, this is kind of what we learn in level 2, like all of those things that I thought were from out there, right? It was shit, it was all me. So that's the beauty in it. That's really the beauty in it, for sure. This has been such an incredible conversation. Any final words? Anything else that either of you beautiful ladies would like to transmit today?
It's worth it. I love that little phrase. It is so worth it. Wherever you are in it and you're like, I don't know, is this really kind of, this is really kicking my ass, or there's more, this little bit of discouragement or whatever, like if it feels a little bit overwhelmed, sometimes it's just nice to hear somebody say, you know what, it's worth it. Like, it's worth it. Whatever that means to you. That felt like that wanted to come through for me. So yeah.
I think I would I want to leave by highlighting what you just said, and just if you're willing to hear it. You know, I've been repeating ears to hear, eyes to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really
Yeah,
want to
man.
highlight the idea that to actually hear this, to actually consider and potentially say yes to walking through the doorway into second level is not a compare and contrast with what it is you've already learned. It's not a trying to fit it in your already understood what everything you've gathered knowledge wise, spirituality wise, modality processes, ways you've engaged with inner work prior. This is not content or truth, rather, to be compared to that to then determine its validity. That's not true deep listening. That's analyzing, and I would highly encourage you to sit with what it means to really listen to something and what it means to analyze it, because there's really a prerequisite of being willing to set aside your own cognitive understandings and your previously built upon psychology, um, to even be able to hear what this could potentially be, to really even be able to receive the frequencies that are coming through the second level. um, put that to the side and really, really open your hearts and your ears um, to the next phase of self growth, integration, and really, really consciousness and human consciousness. I feel like that's the only way you're going to be able to connect with this kind of work.
Well said.
I will leave you with that.
Thank you both so much for being here with me today. Thank you all for watching, and we will see you again next week.
Yay.